So looking at the slides from yesterday, looking at the cultural changes. So these were the slides that we had. So some of the cultural changes that happened. Well, look at this picture. What happened to these people from this picture to this picture? Somebody unmute. Tell me what you see is different about those two pictures.
Mary.
Oh, yeah, there's Mary. Yeah. So one of the things we talked about was that the French married some of these people, right? The French came and they would marry them. What else? So that's an important idea, that they got married to people who were not Native Americans. That changes your culture pretty dramatically. I'm sure you guys can imagine. Imagine if, like, Nali. Imagine if Mai Chao married some guy from Green Bay, right? That would be a lot different for you and your family to have some guy who came from Wisconsin who's in your family now, right?
Mm-hmm.
What else changed about that picture? What do you notice is different about them?
The coat.
Yeah, we can see the clothes they're wearing, right? Look at, he's got his traditional clothes in the picture on the left. In the picture on the right, that looks like more Western clothing. And this is a big thing, is that the U.S. government wanted them to change. The U.S. government forced them to change. They put them into schools to make them change. They took them from their families when they were children and said, hey, we're going to cut your hair. Do any of you have in your culture, is hair important in your culture?
For me, my great grandma, she don't really want us to cut our hair.
Hmm.
There's one time my auntie cut her hair and my great grandma got so mad at her, but my auntie said like it's okay because she married a lot of people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then she's like didn't really care about what my great grandma said. But then my
Hmm.
great grandma, she understand it. She finally understand it, and she didn't like mad that much.
Yeah, and for some cultures, hair is a really important thing. Having long hair is something that's a cultural idea. And for Native Americans, long hair might show strength. It might show that you are, not having your hair cut shows that you've been able to live for a long time, or that you're, it shows power in some way. So imagine if somebody took your long hair and just cut it off of your head, right? Or your grandmother. Imagine if somebody came to your great grandmother and cut her hair off, just told her, you need to cut it right now. So that's some big cultural changes. Some of these things are like the French marrying them. That could be something that's a little bit easier. But if the U.S. government forces them to do it, that's a little bit stronger and hurts a little bit more. Let's see a couple other things that happen. Well, the U.S. government also, they started to build forts. Okay. And this is a fort. We can see it. This is what a fort looks like, or an old fort. They have newer forts too. But the forts are kind of a place where they put soldiers, and then the soldiers will protect people who move there. So imagine, let's try and picture this in this way, I guess. This will make it hopefully a little bit easier to understand. Imagine we have the Native Americans. They live on the rivers, right? And we'll just put a little Native American on there. The Native Americans live along the rivers, and they use the river. What do they use the rivers for? Let's see if we remember from before. What do the Native Americans use the rivers to do?
Find food.
Find food. What else? This is where Groven or Yalian, or you guys can jump in. What do they use the rivers for? To find food?
Travel.
To travel. Yeah, we talked about how the waterways are kind of like highways for them. So now imagine that we have this, and I'm going to bring this guy up. But suddenly, there's a fort just set right along the river there now. Now, what happens to their waterways? What happens to those highways and those places they find food?
No more.
It's no more, right? They don't have the ability to do that. Imagine suddenly there's these people here, and when they see you, they might try to fight you, or you might feel like threatened by them, or nervous or anxious around them. So this is kind of what happens. When the British and the Americans come, they start to build these forts along the river, and that takes away the Native Americans' kind of lifestyle a little bit. And maybe you guys have heard of some of these places, like in Wisconsin, right in Green Bay, we have places like Fort Howard, right? Fort Howard is literally it was a fort, right? It was a place where soldiers would stay, and they protected the people who would come and settle here. Now, some good things that might have happened for them. Some good things for Native Americans. Well, what do we see in the picture? What are some things that might have helped them?
A gun.
Yep, they got guns. So guns make it easier to hunt, easier to protect themselves. What else? What else do we see in that picture?
Scissor, knife, and
Yeah, a lot of different tools that they can use for, like, maybe they can use it for hunting, or they can use it to, like, make things, right?
yeah.
And they can also, so go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I said or cooking.
Or for cooking stuff. Yeah, it makes it a lot easier to cook things. Also, an important thing is they could learn how to farm better, right? Because Native Americans, they did some farming, but not a lot. A lot of times they moved around. They might stay in one place, but a lot of times they did a lot more hunting and trapping. And they did farm some things, but the Europeans were much better at farming a variety of things, and really, like, farming a lot of stuff. So getting a lot of food from what they farmed. Now, some of the negative changes. Well, what happens when you start trapping and catching animals? A
The
big
animal cannot decrease.
the animals go down, right? And the thing was, the Native Americans, when they would catch the animals, they would eat the meat, they'd use the bones, they'd use the fur, they'd use all the animal. But the Europeans, they just wanted the fur. And there's a fascinating picture of there's pictures you can see, like, for example, the buffalo. Buffalo were a big group of animals for the Native Americans. Maybe not in Wisconsin so much, but we can understand maybe. Um, I can spell. Let's grab that.
I'll be right back.
Okay. So one of the things, imagine, like, being a Native American, and you see, like, these are the animals that you use, but imagine seeing, like, these animals here. What do you notice about them? Like, if we zoom in a bit, let's see. What do we know? What do we see about these animals here?
Die.
They're dead. What's wrong with them? What's missing? Zoom in. What do you see? What's missing from these animals?
The foot.
The fur is gone, but they left the animals. So think about that. The Native Americans used the animals for fur, but also for the meat. But some of the Europeans and the Americans, they just kill the animal and take the fur and leave the body there. They don't eat it. They don't do other things with it, right? So think about that also. That's a big cultural change. Also, to find more animals, the Native Americans have to go to new lands. When they go to new lands, there's other Native Americans there already, and maybe they have some fighting happening. We also talked about before that the men left and the women stayed back because the men are out hunting and getting the furs. And now here's another big thing that starts to happen. These are bigger cultural ideas. Before, the Native Americans don't really have leaders, right? for tribes, you have many, many small tribes, and each tribe has a leader. But for the Europeans, they want to talk to just one boss because it's easier to talk to one boss, right? It's much easier to talk to one guy than it is to talk to 10 people. So they would have one person, they'd say, you're the boss of all these groups, but the other groups didn't choose that guy.
So what to do?
Well, then what happens is you have a lot of bad feelings. Think about imagine if like you had 5 families, right? Like, are there other Hmong families nearby where you live?
No.
Are there, like, imagine that you have an apartment and there's like 5 families living in the apartment who are Hmong or Hispanic or something like that, right? And then the owner comes and says, hey, I want one of you to make a decision for all 5 families. What's going to happen?
Each family have to let the leader, like our dad or
So
grandfather.
each family has to kind of figure it out. But what happens if the guy says, okay, I'm the boss, I'll tell you what to do? What happens to the other families? How are they going to feel?
They might not feel okay with that, but maybe they might let that guy go because they're just the only one.
They might let him go, but what happens, especially with bigger groups, is that you're going to have a lot of bad feelings. You're going to have people be like, hey, I don't like that guy. That's not the guy I chose. And the Native Americans they're not used to that kind of structure for leadership. So that starts to create even more problems for the Native Americans with each other. Now they don't like the Europeans or the Americans, but they also don't start to not like each other. And they start to have like kind of disagreements with one another, making it even worse.
Oh,
And then, of course, one of the big things that happens is Christianity. Does everybody know what Christianity is?
is that God? Like the people believe in God?
Yeah, Christians, right? So if you believe in Jesus Christ, you're a Christian. The Native Americans didn't believe that, but the Europeans who came, they basically came and said, you will become a Christian. We want you to become Christian. We want you to join. And they would try to make them join their religion. So what happens is the Native Americans lose their own religion. They lose that piece of their culture. And there was a lot of bad diseases that the Europeans brought with them that hurt them. All right. So again, that's kind of the basics for some of those negative and positive. Again, there were a few positive things for them, but a lot more negative impacts and effects that we can look at before the Europeans came, before the Americans, and after we start to see. And it just gets to be more and more and more for the Native Americans. Okay. Now, let me go ahead and pause this guy.